There have been countless pioneers in the great history of American music. But today, we're going to tell the story of one of the most important and perhaps the most unfairly forgotten, a woman who, during the Great Depression, embraced her masculine identity. She sang her way into the hearts of a nation and made history as the first female country singer to sell over 1 million records with a single song. Her name was Patsy Montana, and you may know her from her little song, "I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart." But her story is so much more than just an iconic song. It's a story of fierce ambition, quiet resilience, and the revolution one woman sparked in a world that wasn't quite ready for her. That's the story of the first cowgirl, and why we all need to remember her name. To truly understand how revolutionary Patsy Montana was, you have to picture the world that shaped her. She entered the world as Rubye Blevins in 1908 in rural Hope, Arkansas. The America she was born into was at a crossroads, caught between a rapidly industrializing future and a deep nostalgic yearning for a simpler, more rugged past. The real Wild West of the 19th century was gone, but its legend was just beginning to be forged into a powerful national myth. The cowboy, once a lowly, overworked ranch hand, was being reborn in dime novels and the flickering images of the brand new art form of motion pictures. He was becoming a symbol of everything America wanted to believe about itself: freedom, rugged individualism, and a steadfast moral compass. As Rubye grew up, two major cultural forces were gathering steam, and they would define not only her life, but the entire nation. The first was the crushing weight of the Great Depression. The economic collapse that began in 1929 created a deep collective psychological wound. People were desperate for an escape, for heroes, for a reminder of a time when things felt simpler and more hopeful. Hollywood, the great dream factory, answered that call with the rise of the Singeing Cowboy. Figures like Gene Autry, Tex Ritter, and later Roy Rogers became monumental stars. They portrayed a clean-cut, idealized version of the Western hero. Men who were quick with a song, a smile, and their fists. They lived by a strict moral code, always defended the underdog, and, of course, always got the girl. This romanticized musical version of the West had very little to do with historical reality, but it was exactly the fantasy a beleaguered nation needed. The second force was the undisputed king of home entertainment: radio. In an era before television, the radio was the hearth around which the nation gathered. And on Saturday nights, millions of families would tune their dials to the sounds of what was then called hillbilly music. Shows like the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, and its even more popular rival at the time, the WLS National Barn Dance in Chicago, were cultural juggernauts. They beamed the music of rural America into living rooms from coast to coast, and that world was, without question, a man's world. The stars were men: Jimmy Rogers, the blue yodeler, whose mournful songs about drifting and longing made him country music's first true superstar; Roy Acuff, the powerful, emotional singer who would be crowned the king of country music. The women who did find a place on these shows were almost always presented within the safe, traditional context of a family act. The most famous of these was the legendary Carter family, where the powerful voices of Sarah and Maybelle were framed by the presence of patriarch A.P. Carter. They sang beautiful, timeless songs of home, faith, and family. The role of women was clearly defined. A woman could be the steadfast mother, the loyal sweetheart, the grieving widow. She was the anchor, the heart of the home. But the idea of a solo female performer, an independent woman singing about her own desires, her own ambitions for a life of adventure, it was not just rare, it was practically non-existent. A woman's place was in the harmony, not singing the lead. She was the prize to be won, the civilizing force to be revered, but never the hero of her own story. It was into this strictly defined landscape, a world of idealized singing cowboys and subservient female roles, that a young woman named Rubye Blevins would ride, armed with a fiddle, a guitar, and a yodel that was about to shatter all expectations. Her story begins not in the spotlight, but in a crowded farmhouse in Hope, Arkansas. Rubye Blevins was the only girl in a family of 10 brothers. This simple fact is central to understanding the woman she would become. From her earliest days, she was surrounded by a boisterous, masculine energy. She learned to hold her own, to be resilient, and to fight for her place. While her father was a practical man who saw little future in music, her mother quietly encouraged her daughter's artistic spirit. She grew up with music all around her, but she also grew up with the implicit understanding that to be heard, a girl had to be just as tough, if not tougher, than the boys. Her first musical love was not the guitar, but the violin. She showed such prodigious talent that her ambitions quickly grew beyond the confines of the family farm. In an act of incredible determination for a young woman of her time and place, she made her way to California in the late 1920s with the goal of studying classical violin at the University of the West, now UCLA. This is a rarely discussed but vital part of her story. She was not an untrained folk singer who simply stumbled into success. She was a serious, dedicated musician with classical training and a deep ambition to make a life in music. California in the Roaring Twenties was a world away from rural Arkansas. It was the land of sunshine, opportunity, and the burgeoning movie industry. It was also where Rubye's musical direction would take a fateful turn. She fell completely under the spell of the biggest sound on the radio, the blue yodel of Jimmy Rogers, the singing brakeman. Rogers was a phenomenon, country music's first true superstar, and his signature yodel was a sound of pure, lonesome freedom that captured the imagination of the country. Rubye was mesmerized. She began practicing relentlessly, not just imitating Rogers' bluesy, melancholic style, but developing her own unique vocal technique. Her yodel was faster, brighter, more intricate, and acrobatic, a sound of pure joy rather than sorrow. It was also in California that the persona of Patsy Montana began to take shape. While performing on a local radio station, a promoter, thinking Rubye Blevins lacked a certain Western flair, suggested a stage name. Patsy was borrowed from a popular silent film actress, Patsy Ruth Miller, whom Rubye admired. For a surname, she chose Montana, inspired by the handsome silent film star and real-life cowboy hero, Monty Montana. The name was perfect. It was friendly, approachable, and instantly evoked the wide-open spaces of the American West. Rubye Blevins, the serious violin student, was now Patsy Montana, the yodeling cowgirl. Her first real taste of professional success came when she teamed up with 2 other female musicians, who were also sisters, to form a trio called the Montana Cowgirls. They sang and played in the popular style of the day, and it was with this group that Patsy honed her performance skills and her cowgirl image. In 1933, as part of a larger act led by a singer named Jimmy Davis, they won a talent contest. The prize was a trip to perform at the Century of Progress World's Fair in Chicago. This was the moment that changed her life. Chicago, not Nashville, was the undisputed capital of country music at the time, thanks entirely to the immense popularity and power of the WLS National Barn Dance. The Barn Dance was more than just a radio show. It was a cultural institution, broadcast live from a packed theater every Saturday night and sponsored by Alka-Seltzer. Its signal reached across the country. It was a sprawling, family-friendly variety show with singers, string bands, comedians, and down-home skits. Being a regular cast member meant you were a certified national star. Patsy, with her unique yodeling talent, girl-next-door charm, and professional polish, quickly caught the attention of the show's producers. She was hired as a solo act, a remarkable achievement for a woman at the time. For over a decade, she was a beloved staple on the biggest country music show in America. She was a star, performing every Saturday night, her voice becoming a familiar comfort to millions. But she was still largely singing songs written by men, often playing the expected part of the sweet, demure country girl. But inside, Rubye Blevins, the ambitious girl from Arkansas who had fought for her place amongst her brothers, had an idea for a different kind of song, a song that would finally tell her own story. The birth of I Wanna Be a Cowboy's Sweetheart in 1934 is one of the pivotal moments in the history of American music. It wasn't crafted in a slick Nashville songwriting session. It was born out of a moment of genuine emotion on the road, in the heart of a young woman who was living a life of unprecedented independence but still felt a pang of loneliness. She was a great admirer of the singer-songwriter Stuart Hamblin, who had written a popular song from a male perspective called Texas Plains. It was a classic cowboy ballad with a few yodeled lines about the freedom of the open range. Patsy loved the feeling of the song. One day, feeling homesick and thinking about her own journey, she took that feeling and decided to write her own version of that story. In a moment of pure inspiration, she took a fragment of Hamblin's melody as a starting point, but wrote entirely new lyrics that came directly from her own heart and her own dreams. She wrote about the life she saw the singing cowboys living in the movies, a life of riding the range, sleeping under the stars, living a life of action and freedom. But she told it from a woman's point of view. This was the revolutionary act. Her song was not about wanting a man to come and rescue her, to take her away to his world. It was a song about wanting to join him, to be an active and equal partner in that adventure. It was a declaration of independence and desire. The lyrics were a fantasy, but they were a fantasy of empowerment. I want to ride the plains and the deserts, out where the west winds blow. On a pinto, my pony, I'll go roving, to where the cattle flow. This was a woman singing not about waiting, but about doing. And then there was the yodel. It wasn't just a vocal trick tacked onto the end. It was the song's emotional centerpiece, an explosion of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a complex, multi-part yodel that showcased her incredible vocal dexterity and breath control. It was the sound of liberation. She began performing the song on the National Barn Dance, and the reaction from the public was immediate and overwhelming. The WLS station was flooded with letters and telegrams. Listeners, especially women, had never heard anything like it. It was a voice for their own unspoken desires for a life bigger than the one society had prescribed for them. In August of 1935, she went into a recording studio in New York City for the American Record Corporation. The session was almost an afterthought, the last song to be recorded at the end of a long day. The producers were tired and some were skeptical of the song's commercial appeal. But when Patsy stepped up to the microphone and unleashed that joyful, soaring yodel, everyone in the room knew they had captured lightning in a bottle. The record was released, and while it wasn't an overnight smash, it began to sell and sell and sell. Through constant radio play and word of mouth, it grew into a genuine phenomenon. It eventually sold over 1 million copies, a staggering number for any record in the Depression era, and an absolutely unheard of achievement for a female country artist. At just 27 years old, the girl from Arkansas had become a queen. She had written and performed a song that not only made her a star, but also gave a voice to the dreams of millions. The monumental success of I Want to Be a Cowboy's Sweetheart turned Patsy Montana into a household name and a certified superstar. But to truly understand the arc of her life, we have to look beyond the record sales and the stage persona and see the woman behind the yodel. By all accounts, Rubye Blevins, the woman who lived behind the Patsy Montana name, was a fascinating blend of fierce ambition and down-to-earth practicality. She was a trailblazer who broke down barriers, but she wasn't a confrontational rebel. She achieved her revolution with a smile, a relentless work ethic, and a sense of professionalism that earned her the respect of her male colleagues in an industry that wasn't always welcoming. One of the most humanizing and vital aspects of her story is her relationship with her husband, Paul Rose. She met him in 1934, the very same year she wrote her iconic song, a year of profound transformation in her life. Rose was not a musician, but a stage manager and promoter for the National Barn Dance. Theirs was a love story born amidst the hustle and bustle of the live radio era. It was not just a romance, it was a partnership. Paul understood the business inside and out. He saw Patsy's immense talent and her potential, and he became a guiding force in her career, helping her navigate contracts, book appearances, and manage the often treacherous waters of the entertainment industry. They were a team, and their long, stable, and happy marriage, which lasted over 50 years until his death, was a remarkable rarity in the tumultuous world of show business. This partnership provides a crucial insight into her character. Patsy was not a manufactured star, a puppet for producers and record labels. She was deeply involved in her own career, but she also understood the value of collaboration and trust. Her marriage to Paul provided her with an emotional and professional anchor, a source of stability that allowed her to weather the intense pressures of fame and a grueling performance schedule. However, the most emotionally significant and rarely discussed chapter of her life story is the choice she made at the absolute height of her fame. After more than a decade as a top star on the National Barn Dance, touring relentlessly across the country, and even appearing in films alongside the biggest singing cowboy of them all, Gene Autry, Patsy's life entered a new phase. She and Paul had 2 daughters, Beverly and Judy. As her children grew, the constant travel and the all-consuming demands of a superstar career began to clash with her deep desire to be a present and active mother. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Patsy Montana made a conscious, deliberate decision to step back. She didn't announce a dramatic retirement, but she fundamentally shifted her priorities. She left the full-time, high-pressure grind of the National Barn Dance and began to turn down long, grueling tours. She chose to be home. This was a monumental decision, and its impact on her historical legacy cannot be overstated. At the very moment when her male peers like Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb, and Eddie Arnold were cementing their legendary status through nonstop touring and recording, Patsy chose a different path. She chose her family. In her wonderfully candid autobiography, Patsy Montana, the Cowboy's Sweetheart, she spoke about this choice with a clarity and self-awareness that is truly striking. She wrote, with no hint of regret, "I decided I'd rather be a big fish in a little pond than a little fish in a big pond. The most important thing was to be home for my girls." This single sentence speaks volumes. It's a statement of profound wisdom and a redefinition of success on her own terms. She had reached the pinnacle of fame, she had achieved the dream, and she had the strength and insight to recognize what was truly important to her in the long run. This choice is the emotional heart of her story. It wasn't a failure or a sign of weakness. It was an act of profound strength and personal integrity. But in the cold, hard context of the 1950s music industry, it had irreversible professional consequences. The business was moving on, and it moved on without her. New sounds were emerging, new stars were being crowned. By choosing to be a mother first and a superstar second, Patsy Montana voluntarily stepped out of the spotlight's brightest glare. She continued to perform and record for the rest of her life, often playing to smaller but deeply devoted audiences. She never stopped being an artist. But she faded from the national consciousness not because she lost her talent or her audience, but because she chose a life that the relentless, forward-moving star-making machine was not built to accommodate. She chose a quiet, personal victory over a loud, public one. Her most profound and lasting influence lies in the lyrical content of her signature songs. Before Patsy, women in country music often sang from a passive point of view. With "I Want to Be a Cowboy's Sweetheart," she made a revolutionary move. For the first time, a woman sang about her own ambition and desire for adventure. She opened a new thematic door, allowing generations of female artists to sing honestly about their dreams. While Patsy Montana's name may have faded for some, "I Want to Be a Cowboy's Sweetheart" has become immortal, woven into the very fabric of American culture. It is recognized as a standard of American popular music. It has been honored with a Grammy Hall of Fame award and has been preserved in the prestigious National Recording Registry at the Library of Congress, cementing its status as a work of significant cultural and historical importance. The song has been covered and reinterpreted by generations of artists across a vast spectrum of genres, from country stars like the Chicks and Leanne Rimes to pop icons like Cyndi Lauper and folk singers like Susie Boggess. Each new version introduces the song and Patsy's story to a new audience. The song has achieved a level of fame that has ironically far eclipsed that of its creator. And as it happened, Patsy Montana did pass away on May 3, 1996, at her home in San Jacinto, California. At the age of 87, her passing was a huge loss to country music, leaving behind deep sorrow in the hearts of fans and generations of artists. Her cause of death was determined to be heart failure. At the time of Patsy Montana's death, the country music community expressed its deepest condolences for the loss of an icon. Although there was no social media outcry like today, her passing was covered with great pomp by mainstream media and country music publications, emphasizing her legacy and immense influence. Articles and obituaries at the time hailed her as a pioneer, a legend, who changed the face of country music. They recalled the breakthrough success of "I Want to Be a Cowboy's Sweetheart" and the image of the strong, independent cowgirl she had created, a new and inspiring role model for women of the time. In the fan community, the sadness was expressed in letters to radio stations and music magazines. Many shared memories of growing up with her singing and her signature yodels. For them, Patsy Montana was not only a talented singer, but also a part of their childhood memories, a symbol of the fun and free spirit of the Wild West. One of the greatest and most timely legacy recognitions for Patsy Montana came just months after her death. In 1996, she was posthumously inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. This is country music's highest honor, a formal and lasting affirmation of her immense contributions. The posthumous honor has left fans both proud and saddened. Patsy Montana's passing has closed an important chapter in country music history, but the voice, spirit, and legacy of the Cowboy's lover will live on in the hearts of those who love the genre.